Now the question is, how do we put all this together so that we can write a unit test and pass in a library context that will use the mock database instead of the real one? And essentially it looks something like this. So here is pseudocode for a unit test. I'm going to make a library context that will be configured to use the mock database. We create a home controller just as we did in the existing unit test that we already wrote. We then tell that home controller to use a different library context, this one that we just created right here in the unit test. Then we can just start doing assertions, just as we saw in the unit test we've already written. So the key here is this call is going to cause every method in the controller to use a different link connector so that it won't actually try to contact the real server. So let's go ahead and update our unit test to do that. Here's the unit test we already wrote. So we've already got kind of most of what we need. All of this stuff down here is completely unrelated to whether we're connected to the real database or the mock database. Everything we need to change will be up here and above where we're creating the home controller. So how do we create a library context that uses the mock database? And the code for it is, there's just kind of a lot of API calls, and I've already just kind of got it down here ready to go. So we'll just copy paste this, and then I'll explain it as we look at it a bit. So first, let me go back to the library context itself. So remember, here's what's deciding whether it's using MySQL or not. This is the onConfiguring method, which automatically gets called when a library context is created. And we can pass in this thing called an options builder. So if we want, we can put options in there, and then it will use them. So that is essentially what we're doing here. I make an options builder for a library context, and then here's the key right here, optionsbuilder.use in-memory database. That is what's going to tell it to use the mock database instead of connecting to the real one. And this string in here is just, you can give it just any name you want. It's not important. All it means is that you can reuse this same mock database later if you want, just by using the same string. It doesn't actually need to be called tiny library or anything like that. I'm calling it tiny library because we're going to make this mock database represent a very tiny library with just like one little book in it. Okay, and then we make a library context, pass in that options builder that we just created. We have our home controller already. Now all I need to do is call that method that I added, controller.useLibraryContext db. Now we're ready to go. The rest of this calling all titles will automatically use the other library context. We don't have to change any code in the controller at all, and the test should just work. So what's missing here, though, is there's not going to be 10 things in this database. In fact, there's nothing in this database because all it is, it's a brand new in-memory database. So it starts with nothing in it. It does have exactly the same schemas that we need, though, because it is a library context in-memory database. So the scaffolding that we already did and gave us all the tables we needed is already there and ready to go. So how do we populate this in-memory database with information that we can test against? So before writing our tests, we just need to start filling in the database, the in-memory database, with information. And we can do that just using plain old link. We have a library context here, and we can write link queries using that library context. So I'm just going to do, let's insert something into it. So in order to insert with link, first we just need to create an object. So we want to create a titles object. So we'll be adding a new book to the in-memory database, which is currently empty. So let's fill this book in with some information. Author, fake author, t.title, fake title, and it needs an ISBN. So I just need to give it anything that has 14 characters. Okay, so that doesn't actually follow the real format. Let's make it follow the real format. I'll replace one of those with a dash in the right place. Okay, there's our fake ISBN. Now, to insert something into a database using link, we can just do db.titles.add t, and then db.save changes. And that's it, just like normal. We just write a link query using db, except this time db is a library context pointing to our in-memory database instead of to the real database. Now we can call all titles just as usual. We can get the result out as we were doing before, except now there won't be 10 results, there will only be 1, since we just added 1 fake book to our in-memory database. Let's rerun our tests and see how we did. It'll have to compile again. Should only take a few seconds here. Now they're running, and good, we passed all the tests. There is only 1 test, but we passed it. And to drive home the key point again, the benefit of this is now all of the inputs to the test and everything the test is doing is right here. We don't have to know anything about an actual database. We don't have to change this query every time the database changes. The database is created right here in the code, and we can always assert against exactly known values. So let's clean this up a little bit though. Chances are we're probably going to want to write multiple different tests that would use something like this tiny little database. Like maybe we would want to make sure that the author is this, the title is this, and so forth. So other tests might want to use this same in-memory database. So all we can do is take all this setup stuff and move it into a helper, and then different unit tests could create that in-memory database and use them. So I'm going to take most of this stuff up through save changes, which is where we're creating the mock database. I'll just copy that, and let's create a helper method that's going to return a library context, because the library context is the thing that represents the database. So library context, make tiny database, and I'll just paste most of that code that I copied. So we have all the options builder that's telling it to use the in-memory database and everything. The only thing we don't need is the home controller, because the home controller is the thing that we were actually just using to run the tests. We're not running any tests here, we're just setting up a fake database. So the only reason this is complaining is because we need to return that library context. Okay, good. So now we have a simple little helper here that's just setting up a nice small in-memory database. So the way we need to change our unit test to take advantage of this is now all this stuff is elsewhere. We do still need to create the home controller, but all of this is also database setup. So we create the home controller, and then all we need to do is tell it to use a library context that comes straight out of this helper method. So we will just pass in make tiny database. Okay, now, so all we really did there was refactor some code, but now I could write another unit test. Let's just get another one kind of template here. Test2 can now use the same setup using that tiny database with one fake book in it. But then I could use I could test a different controller. I could test, for example, checkout book or something like that. And then I just don't have to copy paste the code that creates the setup to the test. But let's do something a little more interesting with this other unit test. Let's have this one test one of the methods that has a side effect, such as inserting or deleting a row. And in order to do that, we will need to either check out or return a book. So we need a patron. This tiny database that I have here doesn't have any patrons. It only has a single title in it. But turns out I already have down here another similar helper method, make medium library. So that's like make tiny library, except we're going to fill in the mock database with a few more things. It's the same concept, though. It returns a library context, and that's the thing that allows us to write link queries and connect them to a database, in this case, a mock database. So this library has just one title, Dune. It has a patron, and it has 2 copies of Dune in the inventory, so with 2 different serial numbers, but the same ISBN. That is the Dune ISBN. And then I just save the changes into that fake database and return it. So let's use that. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to save a library context, we'll just call it DB, as we usually do, equals make medium library. And then we will pass that in to our home controller. Okay, so let's check out a book. In order to check out a book, the way this web server works is somebody has to be logged in. It just uses whoever's currently logged in as the person checking out the book. So let's first log somebody in. So c.checkLogin. That's the controller that just verifies that the name matches the card number. So I'll have Dan with card number 4 log in. And again, let me point out right now that there's no web server running. There's nobody clicking on login and typing this stuff in. This is the beauty of MVC, is we can just directly invoke controllers in a unit test. There's no HTTP going on. There's no web server going on. We're just testing the controllers. So now that Dan is logged in, let's have him check out a book. So we can do c.checkoutBook. And we'll just use one of the serial numbers from this mock database down here. So let's use serial number 1001. Okay, so now we need to verify that it worked. Technically, checkout book does return something, but it's always just going to return success. It returns a simple little JSON object containing success equals true. So what we really want to check, though, is the side effect. Did this controller insert a row into the checked out table in the mock database? So in order to do that, we'll need to just query the checked out table and make sure that it has the right row in it. So to query the database, we can just do it as we normally do and just write a little link query. So var query equals from CO in db.checkedout, select CO. And now we can, this should select the one and only row in the checked out table, because the database started with nothing checked out, and I checked out 1 book. So we can do assert.equal1 query.count. Okay, so that'll verify that there is 1 book checked out. Now we could verify even more information about it, make sure that the row is correct. So let's just make sure that, for example, the card number is correct. So let's do assert.equal card num should be 4, that's what we expect. And we can just get the first item out of the query. So query.toArray at index 0 dot card num. And the only reason this is complaining now is because both sides of this assert need to be the same type, so we'll just cast that to a uint. Okay, let's see how we did. Let's run our unit tests, and it will compile again and take a few seconds. And okay, looks like we passed both tests. Good. So the takeaway from all of this, a couple of things. One, we are not running the real web server. We are just invoking controllers directly. Two, we have modified the home controller ever so slightly so that we can call this method, use library context, and we can pass in our own link connector, which means all of the controllers can now just use the one provided to the whole class, and we can make it either connect to a real database or a fake one or anything we want.